Hey guys, so this week I got to talk with Ben Nichols from Padel.22. Ben has an incredible background working in PR in the tennis industry, and he is now totally hooked into paddle or padel. He actually clarified to me that it is called paddle, but the padel pronunciation is just because the sport is so big in Spanish-speaking countries, and this is the way it is pronounced by Spanish speakers. Duh. It was so interesting talking with Ben. His time working for WADA during the Russian doping scandal in the Olympics is just fascinating to me. And he talked about that and many other things, like players not participating in press conferences nowadays, journalism in the tennis world, and of course, we talked about paddle. I hope that you're enjoying the episodes so far. Remember to follow Vida Tennis on Facebook and Instagram, and you can email me at vidatennispodcast@gmail.com with any questions or suggestions. Get ready to learn from one of the best out there, only here at Vida Tennis. Here is my conversation with Ben. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Vida Tennis, the podcast for those of us who eat, sleep, breathe tennis. I am Jennifer Gelhaus, and today I am talking with Ben Nichols. Ben is the founder and CEO of Padel.22, a new global communications consultancy dedicated to the world of paddle. He's a leading strategic sports communications and international relations professional and has worked with the world's top sports series, leagues, events, teams, leaders, athletes, brands, and media. Ben ran media relations for WADA during the biggest sporting crisis of the 21st century, which was the Russian doping scandal portrayed in the Oscar-winning documentary Icarus. He has overseen communications for the award-winning ATP and WTA Dubai Tennis Championships and worked as group director of communications and public affairs for the Commonwealth Games Federation. He's a lifetime tennis and squash player, and he's currently hooked on the sport of paddle. In 2022, he worked at the premier paddle major at Roland Garros and then led public relations for the Great Britain paddle team at the International Padel Federation World Championships. Welcome, Ben, to Vida Tennis. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Hi, Jennifer. Really good to join you. Thank you for the intro. It makes me sound very old, like I've done a lot.
Well, you're not old, but you have done a lot, and it's such an interesting, exciting career. So let's get into it. I like to start at the beginning. How did you end up working in the tennis world? Was this something that you always saw yourself doing, and has it met your expectations?
Yeah, so I started playing from England, as you can hear. I started playing tennis and squash growing up, actually. Played a lot of racket sports, and I was born near a tennis club. And then my family moved house, and when I was only about 2 years old, they built a tennis court. So I was very lucky. We had a facility there to play, and I just was immersed in tennis. So my family were playing tennis up and down the UK. I was traveling as the younger child, the baby of the family, to all these events, just being immersed in tennis. And then myself, I started playing again myself and regularly in my childhood, and got to a pretty decent level nationally as a junior. And then, like a lot of people with these individual sports, I totally burnt out. I was playing squads, playing really seriously, and just had too much of it. The enjoyment had gone. And I ended up moving into switching one kind of addiction, I suppose, into another, which was squash. And I did the same with squash throughout my teens. I immersed myself in the squash world, got to, again, a half decent level nationally in the UK, and then carried on to my late teens. And then things took over and university happened and so forth. So I spent a lot of my childhood playing sport, and a lot of it playing racket sports. And then the link was I always wanted to work in sport. Number one, I always wanted to work in sort of the media side of sports. So originally I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I did some work earlier in my career in journalism, but I really took the decision to move into the public relations and the marketing promotional side of sport, which I was lucky enough to have a sister that worked in tennis. And so I got some opportunities through her, thankfully, to work at Wimbledon, to work at the Australian Open tennis, to work at Grand Slam events and other tennis tournaments in London, like the Queen's Tennis Tournament, ATP tournament before Wimbledon, working in the press offices. So I got great experience as a student when I was trying to find my way and figure out what I wanted to do in my career. And that really led me into tennis. And then I secured an internship off the back of university. I secured an internship at the ATP in North Florida in Ponte Vedra Beach, which you'll know. And did 3 months with them out there, the ATP, working on their website side of things, so on their writing, but also working on the promotional PR side with the players and and the more corporate side of the ATP as well. So that was a great entry really into sort of working in tennis and working in sport.
That's so cool. Did you go to school in the US or in the UK?
In the UK. I actually, again, when I was younger, both my sisters went to college in the States on tennis scholarships. And I always sort of aspired to doing something similar. And then by the time those days came around, I wasn't playing tennis anymore. And that kind of dissipated that idea. But I was very much kind of looking at it at one stage and thinking that would be a great thing to do, because it has obviously a great reputation for nurturing talent at that age.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how long were you at WADA, the World, what is it, WADA? What does it stand for? It's the anti-doping.
Yeah, it's a nice acronym, World Anti-Doping Agency. Yeah.
I was like, what's the A?
Yeah, so that was a little bit later on. So several years, had a few more years under my belt of experience in the sports industry. And whilst I've been working, and I'm sure we'll come on to it, the sort of promotional side and in various sports, working with players and brands, then I got this opportunity. I was headhunted for a role to head up media relations for WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency. And they happened to be headquartered in Montreal, Canada. And so I packed my bag with my then fiance, now wife, and moved out to Canada and spent 4 years in Montreal on absolutely fascinating 4 years in many ways. Great personally, fantastic city Montreal was, incredible winters, brutal winters, and just a fantastic city to be in, a real mixture of sort of European culture and North American culture as well. So amazing city. Canada's a great country. I don't have a bad word to say about it. I spent 4 years there. And then professionally, it was looking after all the anti-doping situations that you, I'm sure, would have heard about. So it was back in 2013 I joined. So it was just at the tail end of the Lance Armstrong saga and the whole sort of coming out of the doping scandal with the US postal cycling team. And then it led, the next sort of thing on our watch as an organization was the Russian doping scandal. So that was dealing with state-sponsored doping, the whole saga around the Olympics of the Russian team not getting banned and people calling for a ban, and the whole story that went with, obviously led to that, incredible movie Icarus, which won an Oscar as well, which is a great depiction of that whole Russian crisis. So
I remember watching that movie. I watched that movie years ago, and I was just fascinated by it. I remember just being mind blown by the whole and all that happened. I was just like, wow.
Well, it was fascinating, and that there's many things I could tell you about that whole period. But the producer, the main guy in the film, well, there is the science director, the lab director, who's obviously the protagonist and the whole thing. I met him once at the Sochi Games, which was fascinating, at that very laboratory. But then the guy making the film, Brian Fogel, I got to know him because he obviously came to WADA to interview our senior leaders. He was working on that film at the time, which was also WADA were working on that file of the Russian scandal. So when it came out, it really kind of Hollywoodized, I guess, the situation we were dealing with from a work day-to-day point of view. So there we were getting on with our jobs, and then it suddenly made into a Hollywood movie. But it was a time when you came into work and you couldn't make it up. Our sort of systems were breached. We had a lot of kind of it was a turbulent period for the organization, for the Olympic sports movement, for athletes who were affected by this, for cheating in sport, for, everything was intertwined. It was very political. It was incredibly horrifying story in many ways for those that love sport, but fascinating at the same time to think people could go to such lengths to cheat. And the fact it was made into a movie made it all the more exciting for people outside. When they knew you worked for WADA, they were saying, "Oh, I've seen you in this movie, and God, it's amazing, and I can't believe that's where you're working." And you're thinking, well, yeah, this is just my job.
Crazy. So if you don't mind, just kind of help me understand, what was your role during that whole situation? Because you weren't necessarily doing PR for the player, you were on the other side of it. So what was your role in that whole thing?
Yeah. So my role generally there was to handle media relations. So it was trying to proactively promote doping-free sport. So promote a philosophy of fairness, fair play, a level playing field, not cheating, all of those things which most of us take for granted and hope sport is. But of course, like anything in society, there's always an element of cheating, people taking shortcuts. And unfortunately, doping is one of those aspects in sport. So a lot of what we're doing was proactive, but then obviously the bulk of the work was reactively responding to media inquiries, because there was a huge interest from reporters in these doping scandals, whether it be the US postal scandal of cycling, whether it be athletics, track and field, whether it be then the Russian scandal. There would be inquiries from journalists asking about what was going on, about the allegations that had emerged with doping, and what WADA, as the global governing body, I suppose, to deal with doping, was doing about it, where it was, amongst our priorities. So it was very much dealing with journalist inquiries. It was, from a practical level, it was, looking after the social media channels. It was chairing the press conferences, so having to present the leaders from WADA who were investigating these files. It was doing media interviews as a spokesperson, so trying to represent WADA as best I could and get across the view of the agency. So we had a huge amount of scrutiny and exposure of the organization because of these problems going on in sport. And my job was to try and represent the agency as best I could, put across the position of what WADA was doing with various doping issues. So a lot of the time it's what we call a pending investigation. So an allegation would come out about a player or an athlete having doped or potentially doped. And, usually at that time when it comes out, it is a work in progress. So there's a legal case ongoing. So we can't, we can say there's a case ongoing or it's being examined, but we can't, certainly can't say anything detrimental to the athlete. It has to be a neutral process until it's concluded, and at which point they're proven innocent or guilty. So there's a lot of holding statements to show WADA's on this. We're looking at this. This is the process. Once we get there, we'll then know if there's a sanction or if the athlete is exonerated. So a lot of it was, quite technical. A lot of it was quite complex. So we had to juggle two things, really. The complexity on one hand and making sure we were saying what was accurate and factual, with this huge appetite from reporters to want to know every detail, to want to be able to break a story. So you're trying to feed public interest because they want news. You're not there as the organization for anti-doping. You're not there to hide things. You're there to present, clean sport, but respect a legal process. So it was quite a balancing act. But it was a hugely exciting, exhilarating job, and a great thing to be doing for 4 years.
Yeah, that's got to be so challenging because there are so many legal red tape, right? And you have to be so careful with what you say. At the same time, players are probably expressing themselves and you can't go against it necessarily. So you're juggling all these different competing interests. You've got the athlete whose reputation is at stake. There's allegations around them, but they're not a proven cheat until the investigation has concluded. And the media are obviously they're going on allegations, and they're trying to do their job. You're trying to do your job, which is a lot of the time is diffusing it and saying, we're aware of it, we're looking into it, we'll get back to you when there's something to say, essentially. And at the same time, you're trying to provide as much factual information as you can so reporters can do their job. And you've got this huge technical, complicated area around doping, and there are many gray areas. There were substances that athletes would be taking which medically they didn't need to take, maybe, but were they illegal? No. Are they needed to take? And do they help enhance performance? Question mark. So there are substances which are banned, obviously, substances which are not banned, and then there are substances which you'd hear about athletes taking, but they're not prohibited, but they're seen to sort of help you recover or help you to some extent. So the list of substances always being banned was changing. So you're dealing with that as well. And then there was the whole meldonium issue with athletes. Sharapova was one of those. That was a story at the time. So there's a lot of things going on, and you had to do the best you could calmly whilst dealing with media who are on tight deadlines and very keen to get information. It's a fine line between doing everything that you can to get an edge as an athlete and actually going to the other side into cheating. Do you think, in your opinion, do you think that players who end up doping, do you think that they are doing it knowing that they're cheating the system, or do you think that they're kind of seeing it as a fair thing that they're doing because it justifies them just trying to get an edge as an athlete? What's your opinion?
It's a really interesting topic. So I went into WADA, a little bit ideological, I guess, black and white, right? So it's the goodies and the baddies, and it's not that simple. Yes, there are people who want to cheat the system and will double down on cheating and do it again and again.
In Icarus, that was pretty obviously.
And deny. There's
trying to cheat.
There's extremes. There's athletes who will
Yeah.
never cheat, which, to all our research and knowledge is the vast majority, but there's still a proportion who will cheat. And then there's this whole area in between. There's some that are inadvertent cheaters, right? So, and it's hard. They've taken something, a medication, a supplement they didn't know how to ban substance in. And that's the other thing with the prohibited list, what we call it, the list of things you couldn't take. It wasn't about a make of a brand of a company that's prohibited. It's about what the ingredients in those substances are. So in those supplements or substances are. So, in different countries, a brand of a product might have different ingredients to that brand in another country. So it is very much, you're getting down to the detail of what are the substances that are banned. And it's, athletes will take things that, I don't know, I'll give an example, a cough medicine or an inhaler or something that they didn't realize had a banned ingredient in. And then suddenly they, by mistake, have failed a doping test. And that's where there's a gray area or nuance to it. You don't want to just be, there's no sweeping statement of, they're a cheat, etc. You have to look at all the details of the case, the athlete's defense, what the context is. In many ways, you're going against like society's need today to be like extreme on everything. It's really bad and it's black or white and there's the fact, but actually a lot of the time you've got to look at the whole context of the story. How responsible is the athlete? There's a system with anti-doping called strict liability, which is essentially saying the onus is on the athlete to make sure.
It's like when you commit a crime. I mean, you committed the crime.
Yeah, but the onus is on the athlete to prove they haven't cheated. But but there'll be times when, of course, athletes are busy like all of us, and they are, mistakenly they might take something which they later find out they shouldn't have done. So they have to make sure they've got a good case together, and there's the whole defense there. So there are innocent mistakes, and there's also, we saw it in the cycling era of when there's doping was rife in that sport. There were athletes who doped to the extreme and were very strong about it, and then the athletes who sort of got swept up in the team culture and did it, and then thought they'd made a mistake and were like, I'm not a bad guy here. I've made a mistake and I want to sort of repent for it and become a anti-doping advocate. We saw cyclists, look at someone like Tyler Hamilton, who was on the US postal team. He later came out as a strong anti-doping advocate. So you do have people who say, made mistakes and learn from it and want to help people not make the same mistakes. So you have to look at it all in the bigger context of, it's not just goodies and baddies here in sport. It's very much, there's different levels of it. So, and then the most important thing I found when I was there, it was moving away from this kind of mindset of a fight against doping, which was very aggressive, very like, we're going to get the cheats, to, yes, that's important, but it's about protecting clean athletes. So it's more about, actually, we're representing the community who are not there to cheat. So we are almost there as a lobbying group for those that want to play fair and represent their interests every way we can. So it's about making sure they are heard, and those athletes, those playing fair, would have strong voices on doping. They would have, some of them more informed would have their opinions on how long a ban should be, or what substances should be on the prohibited list in their sport, because they're noticing more people are taking something which isn't banned. So you have to really listen to the athlete opinion, as well as the science, as well as the legal side, as well as all the rights, so there's many factors at play.
So it's just so fascinating to me, that whole thing. And in the tennis world, I don't think that tennis is necessarily safe from it. I mean, it happens in every sport, in some sports more than others. But we've recently heard of some allegations towards Simona Halep. Do you have any thoughts on that, or anything that you can share with that?
No, nothing to say on that particularly. I would say tennis with any, tennis with any, we saw it in cycling. There was a big era of doping going on, and I'm not going to say it's immune from doping now, but it's definitely cleaned up its act. It's got a better program. It's got better people involved. The governing bodies are doing a much better job. So something like cycling has come through it well. Something like track and field athletics has come through from a really bad patch 5, 6, 7 years ago to being, it's got its own integrity unit. It's got its own systems in place. It's really come on a huge amount. But that is a sport that will always have an element of cheating because of world records and just the nature of it. Because a sport like tennis, for sure, people have talked about for years, like, well, surely the way the game has changed, it lends itself more to power, speed, or endurance for hours on end. And it's like any sport, people will look to cheat. So, of course, anything that is big business where there's a lot of money at stake in today's era of sport, there is going to be cheating. Is it rife in tennis? I don't see that. I don't see evidence of that. But you've got to have a good anti-doping program. You've got to have the right values as a sport. And yeah, you've got to obviously try and detect when people are doping and cheating and root out those instances.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are a master of public relations, and players, I'm guessing they probably they get some advice from some kind of PR expert as well, professional athletes, I mean. But now you hear even of, let's stick to the tennis world, I guess, of tennis players choosing not to participate in press conferences for whatever reason, right? So let's say it's their mental health. I think it's what I've heard the most. But what do you think about that? Does that hurt? Does that hurt the player? Does that hurt the sport? How does that affect the tennis industry?
I can see it from both sides. I mean, tennis is one of those sports that, that has very strict rules on, no matter how badly you played and how, upset you are after a match, you've got to attend that post press conference in the, in the Grand Slams and the big events. I remember that was always there when I was working in the sport. And that's tough because you're an emotional human being. You've come off court and the last thing you want to do is go and speak to journalists when it's been a bad day at the office. But as part of your responsibilities to be a modern athlete, several things happen. You do have to, there is an element of media. There's an element of, you can't hide away. People want information. They want to share information. They need to know a little bit about who you are. So that comes with the job. As does sponsor endorsements. Maybe the last thing you want to go and do is put a smile on your face after a bad match and do something for your sponsor, but maybe that's in your contract. So there are things that come with being a modern athlete. If you want to capitalize on not just the playing career, but actually doing well off the court and it becoming a good profession to be in. So all of these things are part of being a tennis player. On the flip side, I do understand, that situation, and we live in a time now when there has to be much more sort of empathy or sympathy with mental health and what people are going through. And we live in a really complicated world now. As human beings, have we changed that much over time? Not necessarily, but the world around us has changed hugely. We have so much information coming at us. There's so many distractions. You can try and simplify and keep life basic as much as you want, and there's an element of always being online to today's world. So you're bombarded with messages and demands and requirements, and for sure it can play on people's mental health. And I think we're going to see, without getting too philosophical, I think we're going to see the kids and the next generations come up with some real challenges who've been immersed in screen time, immersed in mobile phones from a young age, and that's for sure going to play on their minds. So the point I'm making is, I think technology probably has an impact on mental health if you misuse it. I think the demands of modern life make it you've got to be very disciplined to really have good well-being. Essentially, make sure you're exercising well, eating well, not getting lots of fresh air, having a good diet, making sure you have a balanced life is really important. And I think the demands on players today as well is it's huge. As I mentioned, some of the media sponsors, etc. So there does need to be an element of humanity, of understanding that players fragility or frame of mind. But at the same time, if it's a requirement for all players, off court to be doing those press conferences, that's what it is. But then the rules need to be looked at. So I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bit of a sitting on the fence answer, but I do see it from both sides. And I think it would be nice if it could be looked at in a case by case example. But then you're setting up a precedent. If someone, because their well-being is pulling out of a press conference, then the next player will want to use an excuse as well. So it needs to be unfortunately, needs to be one set of rules. There needs to be a degree of flexibility when a player is really not in a good place. But that's what those rules are. That's above my pay grade, I'm afraid.
Sure. Well, there's got to be some kind of compromise.
You'd think. You'd think.
Your responsibilities and having some sort of compassion because you're human.
Compassion, exactly. We all have bad days at the office, and I think, absolutely, there needs to be flexibility. It's not just a one size fits all. So how that happens and best plays out, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to showing intent of listening to the players. So understanding what they're going through, making sure you're hearing from them. Do these rules work for them, or is there another way of doing it? Can they be doing do they have a certain commitment for media activity proactively? Were they, doing something not post-match every time, but I don't know. I think, is there a way of hearing from the players and making sure the rules reflect what they will want generally? Of course, there'll always be times they come off court and just think, no, I do not want to do this. But actually, is there a way of, rather than imposing these rules, which have been around for ages on the players as their way of just making sure their feelings are a bit more, accommodated before just assuming it's always been done this way and it has to continue that way. So I don't have an answer for what that is, but I think it is, a lot of it comes down to process and making sure those players and the player councils there, making sure it's all fed in so that the rules reflect on the whole what you think, what works for players and what works for media. It's about finding a middle ground. Yeah.
Just because something has worked forever doesn't mean that it should continue forever,
No, for sure. And it's an easy thing, right? It's an easy thing. Oh, it's always been done like this. Okay, but don't challenge for challenge's sake, but challenge if there's something not right about it, or the world has moved on and this hasn't. Is there a better way of doing it? So if you're tackling it constructively and you're not just trying to cause change for change's sake, but you're actually doing it because of a positive reason, then for sure you need to always be flexible because the world moves pretty quickly these days.
Yeah. And I want to ask maybe a silly question. I mean, I don't know, but I've always kind of wondered this when I watch press conferences. Sometimes I'm just like disappointed, I guess, by the quality of questions that the reporters ask at times. I'm like, sometimes there's some really stupid questions. I mean, or like just questions that the player has already been asked 1,000 times. Can you explain to me maybe like why do they do that? Are they trying to get a rise out of the player? Are they trying to like taunt them, or what is going on?
When you say, look, there's many questions. Look, there's the questions you hear and you're like, this is so vanilla. Like you could almost just put a robot there and ask this question. We know what this press conference is going to be like. Right. How did you play today? How are you feeling going into the next match? It's like, okay, press record and then repeat the So there are those questions and they are just generic questions. And for sure, if I was a player, I'd be getting very frustrated. Oh, let's talk about something a bit more interesting. Let's create something here. But
that's what sometimes I feel for the player, because I'm like, I've never been in that position. And I understand that they're professionals. They're used to it. They should know how to handle it. They should be coached on how to handle these things. But sometimes like you're just human. Like you're going to crack at one point. You get asked the same thing over and over, or you get asked a stupid question or a sexist question that you're just like, you're going to snap at some point. And I just don't understand what is the point of the reporters asking those questions. Is like, are they trying to just get a rise out of the person that they're asking the question to?
There'll be, look, you see it sometimes at Wimbledon. I don't know if it happens so much now, but you definitely saw it before where, I don't know, there's the regular tennis journalists and they're doing a pretty, professional job. But then there's the journalists who'll come in, and I'm not saying they're not doing a professional job. They come in from like the tabloid newspapers and looking for more of the gossip stuff. And so at Wimbledon, you get some of the kind of the tabloid media wanting to know, I don't know, Kornikova or Sharapova or one of the when they're young in their career, where they've been out partying in London and who was that guy they were seen with off court, asking those sort of questions because they want to get the stuff away from the court. Now, those players don't want to answer those questions, do they? So you're kind of wondering why are they doing it, why are they pushing on that when it's only going to get a rise out of those players, or they'll just get, a stonewall response and then they don't go anywhere. So you kind of wonder, why certain questioning happens when you're just, I suppose they're looking for what I call a chink in the armor, a moment of weakness where they suddenly let their guard down and be like, oh yeah, that's my boyfriend, or that, so they're just looking for a story. And for those one-off moments when the player isn't on their game and they let the journalist in, the journalist, might think they've got a good story there and it's interesting, it's juicy, and that's what they will see as their job, is providing something that's interesting to the non-tennis fan who likes to read about the gossip and what's going on and, among players' real lives. So I guess that is, maybe why the reporters are looking for that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. And as a fan, you also it's not very entertaining to just watch a player be a robot and just do the same answer every time, and so polite and so perfect. Yeah. Sometimes you kind of want to see them be human. And I'm thankful for it.
It's tough as a player. It's tough as a player because they will answer those kind of robotic questions time and time again, and they want to be able to talk about something else just to make it feel like a different day. They're in the second round, the third round, they're probably answering the same sort of questions. But they will. There's an element of them wanting to talk about just not the same mundane things of how their forehand was today, etc. Maybe they want to speak about something else, or maybe they would like to engage with a reporter to chat about something really interesting and something a bit more deep. But there's always going to be an element of they're super, they're probably on guard and sensitive as well to the fact that like everything, we live in a time now where everything gets pushed out there. Everything is, picked up on Twitter or any social media platform. Years ago, you'd probably say something and it would just brush on, but didn't make the newspaper. But now everything is picked up instantly on digital. So say one thing wrong and it gets taken totally out of context. And I feel for those players. I feel for celebrities when they do that, when, it just gets taken out of context and it becomes what I call a storm in a teacup, something out of absolutely nothing, right? So players will also be very alert to, going off that kind of robotic mode because they're worried about saying one thing, which might be interesting, but they say one thing and then suddenly it becomes a story of they've got a strong opinion on this and they've caused offense to this person. So we do live in an age, obviously, as well, where it's more politically correct. There's, you've got there's a lot of nuance to what you've got to say. So, and the media don't always pick up on that nuance. They want a headline and they want to create a drama when there's probably not a drama. So navigating that is really hard, really hard.
Everything is so polarized and
everything's so polarized.
Taking a little bit out of context, then it's like, whew.
Yeah, look, if we're speaking about something and we're in a cafe and we're having a chat, they're like, we can pick up the body language and we can pick up the nuance, and we know when someone says something and they might say one word, but we know in the context of the sentence what they mean. Yeah. Now, journalists, some, there's a majority are probably picking the right parts, but some will pick one word and they'll piece it together with their opinion and maybe their newspaper's political persuasion or whatever it may be, and create a story out of something. And if you scale it back and look to what the athlete said within the context of what they were talking about, you're like, oh, no issue there. But obviously, to make a story out of it, pieces get pulled together. So it's clever, but it's also can be really misleading. And I get it with athletes. They're stepping on eggshells and knowing what to say because things will get taken out of context, and that's unfortunate. And we, like I say, chatting in a cafe, chatting on the phone, will know what a conversation is. But, when it gets pulled out and someone reads something online, they don't have that context. So it's a tough world we live in, I think. And it's pretty unforgiving. Why does cancel culture happen? Because people create stuff out of small things. And, it's tough.
And politics seems to always bleed into sport. And I guess in my opinion is that it's not good, but it's kind of inevitable. It's just at some point or another going to happen to a player in any situation.
Yeah,
that politics is going to be a part of it. Yeah. And I think that's so difficult for players.
It's difficult. I think my takeaway from it, my summary is, so you hear a lot about how athletes used to be more personalities. Look at something like Formula One, and there used to be, drivers who were getting up to all sorts of stuff, drinking a lot, partying hard, and then getting behind the wheel, like a dangerous sport. And you look at it in the context of today and you're like, oh, wow, now they've got to be so, it is a glamorized sport and there is a certain amount of partying in Formula One, but it's compared to what it used to be, it's so professional. There's so many sponsor commitments. It's also official. It's much more structured, obviously. And back in the day, it was a bit more of a free for all. And you look at those athletes and they'd say things and there'd be personalities and there'd be people you might have a drink with in the pub and you're like, they're normal people. Now, athletes today, they feel very, like I said, on message with what their sponsor commitments are. Again, very careful to what they say. So in one sense, I feel sorry that those athletes might feel the need to be really safe with what they're communicating in those press conferences. On the other side, there's still an opportunity to talk about interesting stuff. It just doesn't need to be political or controversial. They can be talking about, what their kind of purpose is in bigger life. What are their, charitable endeavors, what are their kind of their aspirations as a person, and that doesn't need to be political, but it's much more interesting than talking about your forehand and backhand. So what are they doing tennis for? Is it to inspire the next generation? Is it to, what's their reasoning for certain things they're doing as their job? And that's interesting content. That's stuff they can talk about from the heart, and that doesn't need to be stuff that becomes a political headline. So there are things to make media copy interesting without worrying about it becoming a drama.
Who do you think is your favorite player when it comes to how they handle themselves and how they interview and how they express themselves?
Going back some, I used to love, my idol as a tennis player was Goran Ivanisevic.
Oh, wow.
I just loved his kind of his nature and just complete wild card in every way. And his Wimbledon story when he eventually did win
And
after
he
three.
won against a Brit, didn't he?
He won the semis. He did. I mean, there's a slight irony
I think
there.
I remember this.
Yeah, he
Who was it? I
He was
forget.
playing Tim Henman, who
Yes,
was like
Henman.
so nearly won Wimbledon, got to like three semis, if I'm right. So nearly there so many times. And in one sense, it's like, yeah, that was his biggest chance. But there was I, like Goran had already, for years been my idol. And he'd made three Wimbledon finals and lost them all. People forget that. Like they talk about him being a wild card, but he was a number 2 in the world. And so it was like it was his time, and it was pretty magical because he was this guy who was about to retire, had his moment 3 times before and not taken it, and then out of nowhere with no ranking comes and storms Wimbledon and just suddenly plays the games of his life, and it was incredible. So that's slightly off topic, but he was a great interview to watch. He was a character and he was fun. I loved Andy Roddick as well, just for his humor and his dry kind of wit, and just he would like you say, when there'd be a boring question from a reporter,
he was hilarious.
He would make something of it. Yeah. I mean, he was great. He was humorous. He was like, and he, straight face, and he would say something, and he'd be like, he's really on it. He's listening to the questions properly. But from a role model point of view, I mean, Federer was just genius. Yeah. Just elegance. Just the multilingual, and not boring. Like he was so professional. He was such a good ambassador for the game. But he was an interesting guy. Post tennis, he's got so many options, so many careers he could have because he's got so many talents, basically. So it'd be interesting to see what he goes on to do. Yeah. I mean, those guys were sort of, to me, the ones that stood out, I think.
I think those are great ones. But I know that you're now a paddle guy, so we got to start talking about paddle. We're talking about tennis. I apologize. Yeah. I'm a tennis person.
Yeah, I'm still a tennis person. Look, I mean, it's still an incredible sport, and that love never goes away. But yeah, there is a new kid on the block.
Yeah, and actually not so new. I was in Spain in 2012. I remember this, and Padel was out, Padel, as they say in Spain. I remember seeing it everywhere. It was exploding. And now it's taken such a long time, I feel like, to make its way to the US. Now it's finally here. I only have one place where I can play paddle at, and it's pretty far from me actually, but it's so much fun. I love it. My husband and I have been playing a little bit, and it's so fun. It's so challenging. I really enjoy it actually. I think it's incredible. There's so many ways to play it. There's so much imagination and creativity with the points. So that part I really enjoy. But how did you get into paddle? And tell us about Padel 22 and what you're what you're currently working on in the paddle world.
Yeah, so I got into paddle. So I had my own consultancy company, PR communications consultancy, for about 4 years. And last year I actually played paddle for the first time in Dubai about 3 or 4 years ago. And my sister, who lives out there, like a lot of people's entry into paddle, she was playing. She had a game, and at the last minute, she said, "Oh, someone's pulled out. I need a fourth player. This game called paddle, and oh, you played squash and tennis. Oh, you'd be quite good at this." And I'd heard of paddle, but not really taken a huge amount of interest at the time. And I played it and totally hooked straight away. Loved it. I came back to the UK. There weren't any courts really, and there still aren't many, but it is changing. And anyway, fast forward to I would play once or twice, 3-4 times a year even, and then last year I just suddenly found myself sort of immersed in this sport, or getting immersed in this sport almost by accident. I went out to the Roland Garros Premier Padel event last summer, and then off the back of that, I was doing a contract for the LTA, so governing body, the equivalent of the USTA here in England. And part of my job was to look after PR for the British Padel team. And at that time, I was also thinking, look, this is a contract I'm doing here. What am I going to do next? And I found myself meeting a lot of paddle people, learning a lot about the industry, becoming more interested in it. And everywhere I turned, something was happening with paddle. It was almost like these kind of fires coming up. And I was just like, right, I think this is a calling for me to work in the sport. And I identified what I thought was a gap in the market to set up a communications marketing consultancy for the sport. And essentially for what I call the new paddle world. So the countries outside of Spain and Latin America that are now embracing this sport. So it's the UKs, the USs, Australia's, Canada's hopefully will come, lots and various European countries where it's not been big until recently. And yeah, essentially set that up late last year, got going January 2nd this year. And it's to look after, it's to do traditional PR, social media, written materials, strategies, marketing, videography, anything that communicates for clubs, for players, for brands, tours, tournaments, anyone working within the sport. And it's been going really well. We've had a lot of interest. We're doing a lot of work in the States, doing work here in the UK. We're looking at the Middle East, which is a big area for paddle. And look, there's going to be multiple different areas of the world where it starts to explode. I think Asia is another one of those. But I took particular interest in North America because I thought, look, it's the world's biggest sports market. It's people embrace that sport in the States and Canada, and it is just beginning that journey. And I was like, if in 20 years' time we kind of trace its roots back, I'm like, 2023 is the year I feel that it was born properly in the States, because you've got the Pro Paddle League. From a business side, there's a company called EEP Capital, who are a venture capital company committed wholly to paddle. So they obviously spotted an opportunity to start investing money in the sport. You've got the likes of Padel Haus, who I'm obviously wearing this top today, who I represent, who are the only club in New York, and have just set up their outdoor courts in Williamsburg as well as their indoor club, and they've got more to come. And you've got clubs on the West Coast as well. You've got Tactica Paddle and what Ryan Redondo and the guys are doing there. And you've got, of course, Miami, and you've got Florida, where the sport is, because of the Hispanic population, is going really quickly. So there are pockets, and it's going to be huge in the States. I would absolutely guarantee it. And I think it's going to be huge. It will just take a longer time than pickleball, which is much quicker and easier and cheaper to set up courts. So yeah, it's kind of watch this space, I feel, in America.
And what I've noticed in paddle is that it seems that it's not just tennis players that have now transitioned to paddle. There's actually people that are true paddle players. That's what they've always played.
Yeah, for sure. So to go back on the point you mentioned before, yeah, for sure, that this is not a new sport. It's a weird one because it's a 40, 50-year-old sport in Mexico, countries in South America and Spain. But then to the kind of English-speaking world or a lot of other countries, it's a new sport. So you've got these two different speeds happening with paddle. And that's the interesting thing, is it's, why is it taking off now in these other countries? Who knows? But it is. And yeah, to your point, it's for sure, it's transferable from tennis into paddle. If you've got a good tennis level, of course, you can pick up paddle very, very quickly. Similar if you play squash or even badminton. I think that's going to be an obvious market for paddle, is to get people from other racket sports in. And that doesn't mean it becomes a competition. People can still play tennis and paddle. I think everyone can win. There's lots of space to go around for people to find their favorite sport. But then, yeah, you can pick it up if you don't play tennis. And that's, I think, the biggest sort of asset the sport has is, tennis is a technical game. Squash is a technical game. It takes a while to pick it up. You can, if you're having a hit with someone on the tennis court and you've never met them before, you're always like that awkward thing. Or am I going to be way better and I have to play down? And are we going to be the right standard to have a decent hit? In paddle, you've got four of you there pretty much always. It's doubles. And the difference is you won't notice as much because it's much easier as a basic sports person to pick up paddle quicker than like a tennis. So it's much more accessible and inclusive in that way. So paddle has that great opportunity to bring people in who are not technically gifted, I suppose, at tennis and other sports, and to get to a good standard really quickly. And it has that ability to bring in racket sports people who already can be good at paddle and still become really sort of obsessed with the sport, because it is there's so many different things to learn. Like, you might be good at tennis, but you've still got to get your instincts working with the walls and all these different
Exactly. That's been the greatest challenge for me, is learning how to, sometimes you have to just kind of let the ball hit the wall instead of just trying to take it right away. And to me, that's the hardest challenge, is having the instinct to get closer and let it hit the wall and then try to hit it back. That's, to me, that's the trickiest part, is figuring out how to hit off the walls. But it's so fun because it's a challenge and it's different in that sense. It's so different from tennis. And one of my favorite things actually about paddle is the sound the ball makes.
Yeah.
It's so satisfying. That's why I like pickleball, but I don't find it satisfying. Like you hit the ball and it just kind of feels like you're hitting a ping pong. I don't know. But like when you hit a paddle, like when it's a tennis ball, like you're hitting with a paddle. It has such a good feel and such a good sound to it. I really like it.
It is, yeah. People mention that actually. The sound is like they pick up on certain things in the sport, and there's the ability, the ability to get good quickly is one. The ability to be able to hit the ball and the ability to kind of have a social interaction as well. You're closer to your partner, so it's more intimate. You're having more like banter and laughter, and there's more. It's just more there, right? And then you've got the sound as well, and people are like, "Yeah, I love the pinging sound of it." It's just.
So good.
I don't know what it is. There's little things that make a sport, and paddle definitely has an identity. It's definitely different. It's quite quirky. It's quite strange in many ways. And I think as a tennis player or a squash player, the biggest thing for me was the instincts. So, in squash, I had a coach who was a former tennis player turned squash player, interestingly. And a lot of people say don't mix the two, but he did well with it. And he used to say, like, volley a lot on the squash court. And so paddle, I was wanting to volley a lot, but then the proper kind of pure paddle people were saying, no, you need to be leaving it, Ben. So there I would be running back to leave the ball, but actually they're like, no, leave it and run forwards because the ball's going to bounce forwards. So it's all messing with your instincts. And that's what makes it fun, because you could be a really, really top tennis player, but it's going to take a lot of getting used to know how to play the sport properly. So I think it's got a huge amount to offer. I think it's not going to be a fad. It's not a temporary thing. It's going to be really popular in the long run. I think it's going to give a lot of the traditional sports a run for their money, but that's good because competition is good. And I think I've yet to find someone who's stepped on a paddle court who hasn't enjoyed it. There will be people, but they're difficult to find. So it's good.
So what are your thoughts on certification? Because right now, I'm a tennis pro. I've been teaching tennis for a long time. And now there's like certification for pickleball, certification for platforms, certification for paddle. And to me, it's like, I've taught tennis. If I can play paddle, I think I can teach it. Because of how much I've taught tennis. Like, do I really need a certification for this if I've played it a certain amount and I'm familiar? And I think as long as you have the experience with the sport, I'm not just going to come in and teach a sport I've never played.
Yeah.
But it just seems like it's getting so specific and so specialized.
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I don't have a strong opinion on it. I think obviously any qualification is going to be really helpful, and there's nothing, you're going to gain a huge amount from going through a course and learning and picking up all those things which you might not get having a hit. Absolutely. Could you coach to a certain level just by learning on the job and playing a lot and figuring it out through intuition? I'm sure you could. I don't have a strong opinion on it. I think there's nothing to lose from obviously going through all the steps of proper tuition, certification. As for whether that is a hard and fast, you have to be certified to do any form of teaching anyone. I don't know. That's not for me to answer, I don't think. But I think there's always stuff to gain from obviously, going through the process.
Yeah. It's just as a tennis pro, at least here in the US, now clubs are expecting you to know how to teach all these other racket sports, right?
And then you have to go
fair
through
enough. You have to, if your club offers that, you should know those as well. But to me, it's like, do I really need to get certified in each one? To me, I don't think so. But I just didn't know if you had that.
No, it's a tough one.
Yeah, sure. And how far do you think paddle is from becoming an Olympic sport?
I think we're 9 years away. I think we could be an Olympic sport in 2032, but a lot needs to happen. There's a governing body which is small, and there's a lot of, I guess, moving parts at the international level with the tours and the governing body that it needs to settle down. It needs to become established. A lot of people finding their feet. So I think the sport needs to have a good governance structure. It needs to have an anti-doping structure in place, which is tried and tested over years. It needs to have a really good solid footing at the organizational governance level internationally. And then, of course, the International Olympic Committee, who decide these things in terms of the Olympics, will have, assessments to make. Is paddle the right sport to bring into the Olympics? I'm sure you know my opinion on that and many others, but it's got to show it is global enough. And I think there's time to show that. And that is happening. It's got to show it's well organized. It's got to show there's, enough people going to pick up the sport, enough courts for the public to go and play. It's got to have lots of credentials in place to be able to be taken on as an Olympic sport. But you look at a sport like squash, which I know is big in the northeast in the States and it's big in the UK and other countries, and it's missed its moment for the Olympics now, unfortunately. It's in the Commonwealth Games, but it's not in the Olympics. It probably had that chance, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it feels like that ship has sailed. But a sport like paddle, you'd think it's got momentum. It's new. It's what's considered as new in a lot of the world. And it's got so much opportunity if it plays its cards right, for all the reasons I mentioned. So much opportunity to become an Olympic sport and to grab young people. And that's the big thing for the Olympics now. They've got to show they have sports that are appealing to young people. And I think paddle can do that. So I don't think it'll be LA. I think it could be Brisbane. And if it's not Brisbane, it will be after that.
Is it expensive to build a paddle court?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, it ranges, but I've heard, figures from, it could be US dollars, $50,000, $60,000. It's expensive to build one because of all the materials and the surfacing, the leveling out of the turf, the terrain underneath. So there's a lot that needs to be put in place. Yeah, that's one of the disadvantages compared to pickleball, where you could just chalk your lines and find a space and get a net and up and running. So that's a big consideration. But I think again, it's once enough courts are built, people will flock. They'll see this sport. They'll get intrigued. Go down to, if you're in New York at the moment, go down to Padel Haus's outdoor space at Domino Park, right by the river and the East River, and you've got three paddle courts there. What great advertising for the sport! People suddenly seeing this racket sport and thinking, what is this thing? And that's great. So it needs a lot of that across the states for the sport to really grow. But it
really catches your eye because it's glass. So you see this shiny court, you're like, what is that? I've never seen anything.
Yeah. I think it's that combination. It's like, it's a mini tennis court. Oh, but there's some cage. Oh, there's some glass. Yeah. It's like, it's a bit, you can't quite put your finger on what is it. So that almost makes you want to be like, okay, how do I go and play this? And am I playing it off the cage or the glass? Like, how does this work? Mm-hmm. So intrigue is a good thing.
And what about the winter? Are they able to play it in the winter up north?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, that's the thing. You need indoor spaces, really. I mean, obviously in the States and Canada, you get some brutal winters, in the north, and it's, look, you need indoor space for sure. When you've got snow as a climate, and it's not happening. The UK, you've got, it's cold in winter, but it's not Arctic. It's not snowing and sub-zero temperatures the whole time. So you can play outside, but it's going to be raining and windy. So indoor facilities are much better for, if you want court usage as an operator, as much of the time of the year. You want people to book those courts without having to check the weather forecast every 10 minutes. So indoor is the prime, I would say. Yeah. Even in somewhere like Dubai in the UAE, you've got, a lot of people building indoor warehouse courts, and you think, well, they've got the perfect climate there. It never changes, right? It's always sunny every day of the year, pretty much. But actually the prime conditions are by some they're seen as indoors because, it's not overly hot. There's no chance of any wind. There's no glare from the sun. It's just like, it's just as it is. So some people will build indoors, even if the climate is great, like you have in Florida, for example.
Yeah, you just have to have a high ceiling. I guess that's why they do the warehouse.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at Padel Haus in New York, they've got they need a high ceiling for that. Yeah, you need the warehouse. There needs to be the height, otherwise it's a non-starter. Yeah. It's a big lobbing game.
And what's your role with Padel Haus? How are you helping?
Yeah, so we're looking after PR and communications for them, and it's a great brand, real kind of lifestyle sort of meets paddle brand. It's very great visually looking, facility when you go there. It's a real sort of Williamsburg, Brooklyn feel to it. They've got a second facility opening up in Dumbo, obviously on the same side of the river in late summer. And then they've just opened Domino Park outdoors. So that's the first, talk about constant history being made for a sport right now in somewhere like the US. The first outdoor court in New York has just opened this weekend. So, these moments are now happening. So it's quite exciting as someone working in the sport to see it and just think, again, you're trying to jump forward 20, 30 years and you think, okay, well, that's where it first happened in New York. So this is and that's the best thing I think about being involved in the sport is it's probably the only time someone, my generation or older in their lives where they've had a new sport basically to work with, or what feels like a new sport. We've all grown up with tennis, with football, golf, whatever it may be. But to have a sport that feels entirely new is exciting because you can do things with it.
Yeah, I just went to the Pro Paddle League because I'm here in Tampa,
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
went to it, and I hated that I missed the first day because they had celebrities and I didn't know. But I just missed the first day. I went the second day, but they had like Daddy Yankee there, and they had
Yeah.
Del Potro, and I was like, dang it, I wish I knew that was happening because I would have went. But
Yeah, they brought some great people on board. They're doing a good thing there, and it'll be interesting to see how it evolves and the more franchise teams that come on board. Yeah, one of my players I look after from the PR side of things is Tia Norton, who's the British #1 female player, plays for the Vegas team. So if you're going down there again,
okay.
say hi. And she's doing a great thing. You know, she's the first Brit involved in that, so she's making her own bit of history by going to the States to progress her own career. So look, there's a lot of firsts, a lot of history being made, and it's an exciting time to be involved.
Yeah, awesome. And now, Ben, before I let you go, I always ask this: what has been the Grand Slam moment of your tennis career, and what has been the double bagel moment of your tennis career? So the high and the low.
Wow.
Tennis or paddle, either way.
Tennis or paddle? Wow, tennis. So the Grand Slam moment. So I went from my first, I mentioned earlier, working in some tennis press offices earlier in my career when I was a student. I went from we have in England our final exams when we're sort of 17, 18, finishing school, are called our A levels. And they were usually around this time of year, so May, June, and then you finish term early, and you finish your school life. And my last exam I did on a Wednesday at school, finished that exam, and it was the first Wednesday of Wimbledon. I'd agreed to work at the championships in the press office as like a runner, so learning the press office, helping the journalists, etc. And so I couldn't start by the Monday when Wimbledon starts, but my last exam was on the Wednesday, so I went straight from that last exam, put down my pen, got on the train up to London, and went straight to Wimbledon, put on my uniform and started working it. And that was the start of my proper tennis career then. And that was a surreal moment, going from being a student to suddenly in this world press office with Agassi and Federer and Sharapova, I think at that time, running around. And it was just like, I've just come from school. It was bizarre. So that was the Grand Slam moment. I think just for suddenly being like, wow, this is incredible. I want to work in sport, and here it is. So that I'll never forget that moment. God, the double bagel moment. God, that's a tough one. There've been some challenging times for sure. I think, God, putting me on the spot here, but
don't give it your PC answer. No, I'm just kidding.
No, seriously. I know there have been a lot. I try and forget the bad moments. No, you need to learn from the tough moments. I think. Yeah, I suppose I did an internship with the ATP, as I mentioned, in Florida back when I finished university. So that was down in Ponte Vedra. I had a great time there. And then I got off the back of that, before finishing it, I got an opportunity to work at the Paris Bercy tennis tournament as well. And I think, being honest, is, you've done an internship and you really hope that a job comes available, and you've worked at this organization for 3 months and you're excited about it, and can it develop into something longer term? And unfortunately, the opportunity wasn't there. And I remember being really disheartened at the time, thinking, really love this place, to work for the governing body straight away, it'd be incredible. And you've got to get the stars to align. There's got to be a role for you there. There's got to be an opening at the time. And alas, at the time, there wasn't. So it was, I remember then that was, the first kind of low moment, I suppose, in my career, albeit early on, to think that there's not an opportunity here yet, and I've got to find something else. So I had to move into sports marketing agency world, which was really good for me. But that moved me outside tennis. And that was sort of the first moment I moved, outside of tennis in that early part of my career. And it was sad, but actually greater things came from it. And you think, actually, I learned more experience. One door shuts, and then suddenly I immersed myself to other sports. So I learned so much more than perhaps if I'd only worked at the ATP for, several years. So in hindsight, no bad feelings at all that didn't happen. But at the time you're thinking, oh, I'm here, I'm really enjoying it. Can I stay out in Florida and work? And, but you've always got to think things happen for a reason, I guess.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that. And that is really why I asked that question, is because we all get those moments where we're so disappointed. Why is this happening to me? And I feel that a lot of times things happen, they don't happen to you, they happen for you. It's another door opening, and you might not see it at that moment, but later on you will. Later on it will make sense. And so that's why I really asked that question.
Yeah, no, totally. It's really important because, we're all human. We'll all get those moments. No one will have plain sailing throughout their career. And that's actually like a really important lesson for those trying to get into the industry to learn, is like, there's a certain element of, with the younger generations, of feeling like they want to walk straight into the CEO's job, like a little bit of entitlement, right? Mm-hmm. And no, it doesn't work like that. Sorry. Like, we've all put in a lot of hard work, and you've got to you might get opportunities and doors open, but you've got to really earn your way and work hard. There's no secret to it. It's working hard. It's being opportunistic, making opportunities happen. Sending that email to someone you might have met who is an interesting person and you'd like to help in some way, following up with people, asking people questions, just like making stuff. You can make stuff happen, but then there's a certain amount of things which are uncontrollable. Like you say, if there's not a job there when you want it, timing is everything. So, okay, no problem. Move on to the next thing. How can I create another exciting opportunity? So I think you constantly got to be looking outside the box and accept some things are uncontrollable. Some things are within your control and you can persist with, but some things let go, move on and try something different. Just don't get stale and try and do the same thing and just think that's the end of your road. There's always another road. So
right. And I think as athletes, we're all very result driven. We're used to working hard and reaching the goal and getting that satisfaction. Sometimes in real life that doesn't happen. I guess it'd be comparable to working hard and then expecting to win every match. You're going to lose sometimes. Sometimes you're going to lose. Sometimes you're going to win.
You're going to lose, but it's kind of being tenacious, working hard, and not you hear it everywhere, but it's not giving up. To be honest.
Yeah. And Ben, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so Padel22 is Padel-22, so padel-22.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I use that very actively for the Padel Business Network. And we're on Instagram as well, Padel22 Global. And we are just at the end of an email, at the end of a call. I'm sure you'll see the details in the show notes as well. But like I said, we work with clubs, players, brands, businesses, leagues, tournaments, all of it within Padel. And we're there to put people on the map. So to raise their profile, to get them known, to help them succeed with their business by having visibility. That's what we're there to do, and we're loving doing it.
Awesome. And do you do any PR for tennis people or tennis players?
At the moment, no. I have done in the past. It was something we didn't talk about. Is when I lived in Dubai and I looked after communications for the Dubai Tennis Championships, which was ATP and WTA. And that was when, that's when I was working with, it's great. It's Venus Williams, Djokovic, a younger Federer, and that was fun. And that was working very much with the players. A great experience. So now, look, at the moment, it's not tennis. It's all about Padel. But it's good to be going through that again and helping players build their profiles.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I love learning about your career and what you're doing in the Padel. We're so exciting.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. It's great.
Thank you so much for listening to Vida Tennis. If you want to learn more about Ben and Padel22, you should check out his website. As usual, you can find all the links in the show notes. It is hard to believe that this was already our 20th episode of Vida Tennis. I am having so much fun doing this, and I really hope that you're enjoying the content so far and that you're actually getting something from it. If you are enjoying it and want to support this type of content, please share on your social media or just with someone who you think will like it. It really does mean a lot. You can also rate and review the podcast so that other like-minded listeners can find this type of content. Thanks for listening, and until next time.